This is Friday, March 6th. I'm Pamela Stern and I'm with Ron Noullet. We are looking at some photos and going to talk about the job of the business agent. Okay, so Ron, I'm going to turn to the photo that shows the ship, and the decks on the ship, and if one of you can describe that one to me. It'd be just one moment. Like, get that one to come up. There, that's the one. So this is the one. It's labeled Damage Forwards number 4, and you were telling me last week about this ship and the special decks that it had. And I wonder if you could just describe this photo for me, please.
Okay, well, what the photo shows is we called it false decking. It was like scaffolding and staging. Mm-hmm. And what we have on deck here is probably 40-foot by 12-foot platforms that went on top of the scaffolding. And then the cars or the vehicles were all parked on that. What this did was that it allowed a cargo ship, like this was a ship that usually carried steel products, pipe and scalp into our country, and normally left with logs or a load of lumber in the hatches and on the decks. But when they started getting a lot of cars, they converted them so that this was some of our first big car ships, so that they could load more cars into a ship, and they would use the false decking. So they would bring it over here and unload the cars. The false decking would go up on deck, and then they could still load the bottom decks, the actual hatches, with lumber or pulp or whatever else they wanted to take back to Korea, Japan, wherever they were going with it.
Okay. So they didn't use the false decking when it was carrying steel or carrying lumber. That was just an innovation so they could put cars on it.
Yeah, precisely. That decking would not hold up the weight of a load of lumber or a load of, relatively speaking, a deck load of cars weighs a lot less than a deck load of steel.
Okay.
So those decks were only there so that you could bring in cars and vehicles in them. Did
they use those ships for cars very long?
It lasted quite a few years. There was a whole evolution of the car ships. When we first got car ships, they were far and few between, and they weren't really a car ship as such. They were just a cargo ship that carried some cars, and in fact we unloaded car ships by driving the front and back wheels over a set of nets for each individual, for the front wheels and the back wheels, and then a frame would be lowered down, and the nets would be hooked onto the frame and taken out of the hatch by the crane or the winches, whichever it was you were running. And that evolved into what we called fingers that just kind of wrapped around all 4 of the tires and were pinned so that and of course that was on a frame again. Mm-hmm. So then you were able to get rid of using those nets, and it was somewhat safer and somewhat quicker. After that we got into we used the nets or the fingers to clear a spot down the hatch, and then we used what was called a robot. So it was like a cage that you drove the cage would be lowered down into the hatch, and you would lower when it hit the deck, there was on the front and the back of the cage, there was little ramps that would fold down when the weight was off of the cage, and you would drive a car in there and leave it in neutral with the brake off, and they would just pick it up so slightly, or somebody would hold the car in place, and when they picked it up, end ramps would fold up, and that would hold the car in place. And when it came out onto the dock, they would land it on the dock, and of course they'd land it one end on a block so that the actual cage would be on a slant, and when the end flaps or ramps folded down, the car would just roll right out. And then somebody on the dock would take it from there
Okay.
and park it out in,
Okay.
in the lot.
Okay, did guys ever ride in the car in the cage?
Not to my knowledge.
Okay, because it
But
sounds like,
probably
it sounds like
it
it would have been a fun
It
thing.
probably had happened, but not to my knowledge. I never saw it.
Okay, seems like a pretty slow process of lowering a cage in, driving a car in, guy getting out of the car, lifting it out of the ship, and then putting it on the deck, and somebody else driving it out.
Well, comparatively to what we have today, it was a very slow process, but it was still quicker. It was quicker than using the nets, and it was quicker than using the fingers. And but then when you compare it to just what we have today with the row car ships, or roll on, roll off, it's just like a big ferry. So
Right.
compared to that,
Right.
it's
Do you have
very
any,
slow.
do you have any idea where these innovations came from? Did somebody here think them up? Did they come, was it something that somebody in Japan?
I don't think it was probably somebody in Japan, or somebody that had a forward-thinking person, because I don't recall anybody here contributing to it. Maybe we did. Maybe we refined some of the what we did with the nets or the fingers to make it quicker and easier, and mostly easier for us. We weren't looking to make it that much quicker unless we were going home early or something. But I think that these innovations came from probably the manufacturers or the people shipping them.
Okay. All right, so you mentioned the crane and the winch. What's the difference?
Crane is okay. The crane, the boom swings out.
Okay.
The same as a swinging stick crane. When I talk of winches, I'm talking about standing gear, where you have a fixed center boom, and one boom that's fixed, but it's over the dock. And that would be called, one was called the, now I'm not certain here. The yard boom was always the one that was out over the dock or out over the scow. And then they were linked together with a winch on each boom, so that it's hard to explain without using my hands here.
I'm trying to imagine how the winch, if it was fixed, how you got the cargo in and out of the ship.
One boom was out on the dock, one boom was midship boom.
So a ship had both.
The midship boom was what I was thinking of.
Okay.
So the midship boom sits over the hatch.
Okay.
Usually if you're loading a dock, then it would be at the side of the hatch. Here's the midship boom. Here's the boom that sits over the yard boom that sits over the dock, or if you were loading off the scow. Now each of those has a winch with a cable going up to the tip of the boom, and then they're conjoined.
Okay.
In the center. So as one winch is picking up, usually to take out of the hatch, you pick it up with both winches. Once you clear the hatch, one winch is going up and one winch is going down, so that the load will shift from the midship boom to the yard boom, and then down onto the dock.
Oh. So is that why you needed two winch drivers?
Originally we had two winch drivers, one on each winch. Eventually somebody said, well, one guy can handle both at the same time. And that's what you did. You stood there and you had the midship boom in one hand and the yard boom in the other hand, and you would handle both winches at the same time. It was it was quite an art to do.
Right. But it also must have been quite an art for two winch drivers to learn to work together.
It was, because you got most of the time after you had a lot of experience, everybody pretty much did it the same. But if you had two winch drivers in a gang and they did it to the same time, the one winch driver would pretty much know what the other winch driver was going to do. When the guy was picking it up on the midship boom, you were just keeping the slack on your boom, and if it was too close to the edge of the hatch, you would pull it out a little bit, and you would come up together. As soon as you cleared the hatch, you would be still picking it up, and the other one would be coming back. So the load would come out. It was
So it's kind of a ballet.
It was like a ballet. It was like a ballet. It was. It was. You think it was easy?
No,
Just
I
get
don't.
on
I
it.
don't think it was
If
easy.
you thought it was easy, just get on there and try it, because it took a lot of coordination, and
Yeah.
it was a real art to see guys
Yeah.
that. And you know, and you really respected it when we were working with sacks and loose stuff on a load or long lumber. You really respected these guys that could make. We used to say they could make those machines sing.
Ah, okay.
And if it was, some guys were smooth as silk. Some guys were rough as, you know, you just read it to be down below, and had some of them on the winches.
Okay. So the crane operators today, how does that compare to?
Well, a crane operator today, he sits up in the cab on a boom crane. I'm not talking on a gantry crane.
Okay.
Like a boom crane. He'll sit up in the cab, and as the cab will turn in conjunction with the boom. The boom is he's sitting in between the two legs of the boom, and they're joined at the top. And he's sitting in between there. And when he picks a load up, he'll pick it up and move to the center of the hatch so it's clear to pick up. And once it clears the hatch, he'll be swinging, and he'll be turning with the boom. He'll be turning like this out onto the dock, and the boom will be coming down. And if he can see, he'll do it right to the point where the load is landed on the dock. If not, he'll bring it out of the hatch. He'll do what he can see. He'll bring it out of the hatch, and when it comes to the dock, if it's not visible, he'll have a guy standing at the side of the ship on the hatch to give him a signal as to go further one way or the other, and then when to come down. So you bring the load out, swing it over, booming down onto the dock, and then come down with the wire.
Okay.
Land it on the dock, the slingman unhook it, or if you're picking loads up off the dock, you're just doing the same thing but only in reverse. The slingman unhook it, you go back.
Are they
for
still
another
called
load.
slingmen?
Slingman, yes, they're still called slingmen.
Okay.
For those jobs, we still have slingmen.
Okay. And now just so I'm not entirely clear on this. What's the difference between a boom crane and a gantry crane?
Oh, there's a lot of difference. A gantry crane doesn't have a swinging boom.
Okay.
It has.
That's the one with the bar that goes out forward and comes down on comes down with wires onto the ship? Is that the gantry crane?
That's a head. That's what's
a head.
called the gantry head.
The gantry head, but that's on the gantry crane.
That's on the gantry crane.
Okay.
And on the gantry crane, it would have.
Yeah, okay. So, you told me that this ship sprung a leak and all the cars sloshed around and got wrecked, and that's what all those other photos.
I'm not absolutely sure how the water got in the
Okay.
hatches.
Okay.
It could have been that they were in